Here we go. Okay. I see that people are coming in. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us at lunchtime. I hope you've got your lunch or maybe a warm coffee or tea today. We'll start in just a minute as everyone gets in and we get settled. We've done this enough, but I'm always excited when it actually works and people join us. So thank you for coming in. We'll get going in 1 minute. All right, a few more people are coming in. Okay, and I'm sure people will join us throughout the hour. But welcome everyone. I am Kathy Kajigian. I am the Chief Communications Officer here in District 109, and we are so excited to have you for our virtual Lunch and Learn session to learn about our referendum, Redefine 109. Just to start out, we will be taking questions. We will answer all of them that come through at the end. Please use the Q&A and we will make sure to answer all of them. This is a webinar that's being recorded, so those of you who are on the webinar, we can't see your names or your faces. When we record it, you'll just see the presentation and those of us who are speaking. But without further ado, John Filippi, take it away.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to spend with us here this afternoon over the lunch hour. As Kathy shared, my name is John Filippi. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations for District 109. Been with the district for 15 years, starting as the Assistant Principal at Caruso and then the Principal at Shepherd Middle School before spending the last 8 years here in the Finance office. But what I want to share with you over the lunch hour today is how this plan came to be and all of the different touch points that have occurred over the past 5 years to shape this plan. One of the things that's been very important to the district throughout this process is trying to check as many boxes as we possibly could to address some of the challenges that are before the school district, but do so in a way that meets the community's interests. And really, the moment that we arrive at now is one that's been 5 years in the making. It began in 2022 when the district commissioned its architect to do an operational and educational assessment of the district's 6 schools. And what that looked like was our architect, first from an educational lens, meeting with our teachers, our support staff members, our building administrators, and really trying to understand how well our facilities were meeting the teaching and learning goals that are happening in our classrooms each day. But while they were having those conversations about how best these facilities were meeting educational aims, they also had their engineers crawling in all of the areas of the buildings that you can't necessarily see, and some that you can, to get a good assessment of the building's condition, looking both from the lens of how the mechanical systems were supporting the facilities and how plumbing was working in the buildings, and also looking at the building's envelope, understanding the conditions of roofs, doors, windows, and wall structures. And understanding all of the issues from that operational and educational facility assessment, the district then formed a group that we called our steering committee in 2023. And that was a group comprised of teachers and support staff members, parents, Board of Education members, administrators, and that group's charge was really to throw the spaghetti at the wall, so to speak, to think of every possible way that we could approach solving some of these facility challenges that were before the district. And the group did just that. They spent time looking at options that included things like closing an elementary school and transitioning to 3 schools for elementary grades. They looked at things like grade level centers, having students, in the early primary grades attend one campus and then later elementary another campus. They looked at large pre-K through 8 options, and would that make sense for the district, transitioning from 6 buildings to 2? And they looked at maintaining our neighborhood schools and renovating and adding to them. And they looked at new construction options. And out of that group emerged a few viable strategies. The first of which was, establishing a baseline of how much the district would need to expend over the next 2 decades if it weren't to make any improvements, but just keep these buildings in service. Option that looked at renovation and additions and also new construction options. And then my charge in 2024 was to refine those options. Our architects had put pen to paper and had created cost estimates for these projects. But before we engaged more broadly with the community, we wanted to have a second look at that. And so we brought a group called an owner's rep on board. And their job and their expertise is really around estimating the cost of projects. And they took a second look. And once we had that second look, we engaged with the referendum task force in 2025. And that was a group that was deliberately comprised of folks that have different points of view from our community. So we had some teachers in that group and support staff members and administrators, but we also had some parents that had students currently in the system. We had some parents whose kids had long ago gone through our system. We had folks that had the perspective of the village, the park district, and really it was intended to be a group that had differing points of view, differing opinions, and their charge was to recommend to the district what plan they thought that the community would support, and they were to recommend a plan that we should share and that we should test in the community. And so throughout the fall, we ran a number of information sessions and continued to listen throughout that process. And that culminated with the district putting a public opinion poll in the field. And from that poll, we learned more and we further refined the plan. But we are here now in 2026, and the board has elected to put a referendum on the March 17th, 2026 ballot. But I do want to back up just a second and talk about some of the facility challenges that are before the district. So the district has 6 schools. Our oldest school is Kipling Elementary School, constructed in 1949. The rest of our elementary schools were constructed in 1957, and our middle schools were constructed in the 60s, with Caruso Middle School being our newest building, constructed in 1969. Caruso is also the only building that was purpose-built with air conditioning. And so when we look at some of the facility challenges that we face, Caruso is our best functioning facility because it was intended to have air conditioning, whereas the other 5 campuses have had some retrofit work done in their past. But when we look at our middle schools fare better than our elementary schools. The biggest challenge that we face at our middle schools, and we face this challenge at all of our schools, is we do have safety and security gaps in comparison to our neighboring peers. The district has made a number of investments in security over time, but we have a ways to go. And this proposed project would address some of those gaps. But really, the lion's share of issues that we face are at our elementary campuses. And they boil down to a few different areas. And the first is that our plumbing and sewer infrastructure is at end of useful life. These buildings were constructed in an era where they used either clay tile for our sewer piping or cast iron for our sewer piping. And in both instances, we know our systems that are at end of life because we've cameraed all of these lines. And we also know that on the supply side of the plumbing equation, our buildings were constructed in an era where they used galvanized steel piping, and that piping corrodes over time, and it has a useful life, and we've reached that useful life. Some good examples of the challenges that we face have occurred within the past 12 months, and actually within the past 12 hours, frankly. At South Park, we have blown the main water supply line leading into the building twice over the last 12 months. That's what you see here. And last night, we blew the line going into Walden. Now, in all 3 of these instances, we were fortunate because the building held water pressure so that we could continue to flush toilets and had functional plumbing throughout the day. And the break occurred in the location that we could easily get to. just outside the building twice at South Park. One was a bit more difficult and needed to be hand dug down 9 feet. The one you see here was fairly easy to get to, and the one at Walden last night was fairly easy to get to as well. But we have a really challenge in front of us. If one of these pipes lets go beneath uh, the concrete subfloor in the building or somewhere else in the building, and we know a school up in the Grays Lake area had just the same issue, and they were out of their building for a period of months. And fortunately, they had CLC nearby so that they were able to attend in-person instruction there. We know that if we have one of these issues, we don't have somewhere to go. And so that would mean that we would have to revert to a protracted period of e-learning until we could stand up enough trailered classrooms to support in-person instruction. Because for us to get into the building to make a repair on some of these issues is very disruptive. We would need to get heavy equipment in. We would need to, essentially tear apart a large portion of the building to get down and just put a patch on what we already know is a failing piece of infrastructure. And these aren't easy things for us to fix. This is not something that we can do over a summer construction window because all of these pipes are buried deep beneath the concrete floors of our schools. The building is at a point where it doesn't need an outpatient procedure, it needs open heart surgery. And we need, a period of months, not 38 days over a summer window to get that work done. We also have significant issues related to our ability to heat and cool our buildings. So our buildings were constructed, again, 5 of 6 with only radiant heat to support them. And when we did an air conditioning retrofit about 15 years ago, that triggered a requirement to bring in some fresh outdoor air into these spaces. So if you go on one of the tours of our facilities, our Director of Buildings and Grounds, Tim Ryan, does a good job walking you through how those mechanical systems work. But essentially, we've got 3 competing systems. The net of it is we experience a lot of breakdowns, and we have challenges keeping up with the very cold temperatures and the very hot temperatures. And this week was a good example of that. We had an administrative team call on Sunday as we were looking at our buildings, had a number of classrooms that were 58 degrees across our elementary schools, and we had a lot more that were in the low 60s. And these were some emails that our staff had sent out to parents that didn't reward me with a lot of fan mail because they were asking, to send kids bundled, but it is the reality that we're facing. And even if the district were to do nothing at this moment, and we'll talk about what the cost is associated with that baseline plan, we would need to invest well over $30 million in replacing these failing mechanical systems. And you're still going to be challenged in these spaces where the buildings weren't constructed and weren't wholesale renovated to accommodate the equipment that we're trying to put in there.
And John, I just want to point out that that picture on that slide is of our kindergarten wing at Wilmot, and you see those doors are open, and behind one of those doors is a large mobile heating unit to keep that wing warm. That was our coldest wing in the district. And we heard some buzz out in the community. We put out a message Sunday night to families to let them know that, we did have some cold temperatures in some areas, pockets throughout the district. And we heard that there was some buzz that we were communicating because of the referendum. And maybe in the past we hadn't communicated all of the issues in our facilities, but we do now because we feel it's important for our families to know. We want our kids to layer up and be as comfortable as possible, and our staff as well in these buildings. So we may communicate more frequently now. About awareness of these issues, but it's not because of the referendum. It's because our families need to know how to support kids coming to learn.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kathy, that I didn't touch on is we do have the need when we have cold classrooms like this or when we have really hot classrooms to bring in these temporary units to try to help temper those issues. One of the challenges with that is they're very noisy. So they are, distracting and they can be quite a bit to talk over. The other issue is that we tend to put them in the common spaces so that more rooms can benefit from them. And you see classroom doors open. Well, we know from a security standpoint that we want classroom doors closed and locked at all times. Unfortunately, when we're competing with, the ability to keep a space comfortable for its occupants, we have to forego that security consideration. So just another issue on that HVAC front. We know that we have insufficient electrical infrastructure to these buildings. They were constructed in an era when, you may have needed a convenience outlet in a classroom, and primarily the power that was in the room was for cleaning the room. Well, we know we've got, technology that's grown in terms of having our displays for instruction. And one of the requests that frequently comes to us from families is, hey, we don't want our kids' one-to-one device coming home with them. We want our kids to spend less time on a device. We don't want that to be something that is coming home. Well, we have to, at this point, send them home to be charged because we lack enough amperage in each of these buildings to accommodate charging stations in each one of the classrooms. We have 1,200 amp service to each one of these buildings. Typical residential home has a 200 or a 400 amp service. So you can understand the size of the building compared to what we have is insufficient. And we have accessibility issues across all of our campuses, nowhere more so acute than at Wilmot. And folks tend to rightly think about accessibility around stairways and ramps. And that's very true. And at Wilmot, we have a building that has 11 different levels within it because it's been added on to so many different times. And those pose some significant challenges to renovate your way out of. But ADA is more than just staircases. It really looks at things like size of washrooms and the ability for somebody to be able to navigate that space. And we have undersized spaces. It looks at width of corridors. And one of the other things that it looks at is the swing of doors. So in a lot of our buildings, you'll note that the doors will swing directly out into the hallway space. And they can't swing just directly into the classroom space either. What they should be is kind of recessed into what's called a pocketed doorway so that folks in the classroom and folks in the hallway are protected from that door swinging out. And then also, if there were to be, an emergency where folks would need to evacuate the school, you don't have all of these doors swung directly into the hall. We're at a point where if we don't touch the facility, we're grandfathered in on a lot of these issues. We don't have to address them. But as soon as we start talking about making these wholesale renovations and changes, the facilities to address these issues, we're required to then make those changes to the building. Well, what does that mean for us? It means that we exacerbate some other issues. So we know that our classrooms are undersized for modern learning. But if we pocket that door, then we've taken additional square footage out of that classroom. If we add a washroom that's missing in a kindergarten or a first grade classroom, we've reduced the size of the classroom even further. So need to be thoughtful and planful in terms of how we would address some of these issues. And at Wilmot, in particular, renovating our way out of all of the ADA issues there is really kind of a bridge too far. And we have space issues at all of our campuses. And folks throughout this process have rightly asked, well, do you have a picture of what enrollment looks like in the district? How does enrollment today compare to where it was previously? And do you know where enrollment's going to be 10 years from now? And the answer to that question is we are down some students from where we were historically. And we do work collaboratively with the village to hire a demographer on an annual basis to give us a 10-year look ahead. We are projected to remain stable with our enrollment over the next 10 years, even accounting for the new developments that are going in next to Walgreens on the other side of the tollway, and also in a portion of Highland Park that is within the District 109 boundaries, where it used to be the Solo Cup factory. But what has changed is all of the supports and services that school offers. So when our buildings were constructed, special education didn't exist. And so goes the story in terms of the supports and services that our district, not just our district, but all school districts provide to their students. So, we are very adept at understanding and identifying students who need additional support in reading and in math. Well, that means that we have dedicated staff that are providing those supports and services. So we've got reading interventionists, we've got math interventionists, we have instructional coaches, we have physical therapists and occupational therapists, we have guidance counselors and social workers and psychologists. And so as the mission of public education has grown over time, so too have the needs for spaces for adults to work with students. In that center picture, you see an adult working one-on-one with a student to provide that level of support, and they have nowhere to go but to sit out in the hallway where that student is seen, by peers. Is certainly not a space that is conducive for that work. And what that means is over time, we have pushed the copy machine into the hallway and repurpose the copy room into a place where a social worker can work with the students, that we've taken over areas that used to be closets and now use them for intervention for students. And so we have a lot of the important work of the district happening in these marginalized spaces. And there is one campus where they are busting at the seams, and that is Walden, because Walden is about 20,000 square feet undersized compared to what it should be. And it is significantly undersized in comparison to its peer elementary schools across the district. So when we met with the task force, we looked at 4 different options and tested 4 different options with that group. The first was, again, looking at a baseline. If the district were to do nothing, what would the district need to invest? And we picked a 20-year horizon because the biggest bill that's coming due for this school district, if we were to do no improvements, is we would need to invest over $30 million in mechanical equipment to support the HVAC in the district. And we weren't going to make an investment of that nature if we were going to tear it down 5 years from now. So what we did here is the architect looked at, what are all of the issues associated with roofs that would need to be replaced, with mechanical systems that would need to be replaced, doors, windows, all of the things that we can get to, and that would be at end of life over that next 20-year period. And they did a cost projection. They looked at today's dollars and they extended those out with construction cost escalation to understand what that would cost the district over that net 20-year period. Task force looked at that and said, listen, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the district to invest all of the dollars that it has for capital needs, only to arrive at the same moment that we are today. And also to point out that if we were to invest these dollars, that does not include wholesale replacement of our failing infrastructure because we simply cannot get to it without getting our students and staff out of these facilities. So it includes an allowance to patch those issues, but we know those issues will persist and will not be addressed. We also looked at a renovations and additions plan. That was a net cost of just over $208 million, and that involved fully renovating and adding to our 4 elementary campuses and doing some targeted work at our middle schools. The challenge here was the reason that this plan was substantially less than the 2+2 plan when the task force considered it is because Walden can only grow so much more because that site is a shared site with the Park District, and that if the building continues to spread and spread on that site, there are issues with that site continuing to function as a park. We also can't go up on that site without tearing down that building or portions thereof. And the other piece that was a consideration here was how we would have to phase this to be able to get in fully renovate these facilities. Our architect felt that construction would need to go on over a 4-year period, and that we would need to be having our students and staff, a portion of them, transitioning into trailered classrooms on those sites over that 4-year period. And that means that our students and staff are going to be moving in and out of an active construction site throughout that process. Well, you take days like today, you've got to, put your boots on, put your coats on to go in for art class. Then you got to do the same to get back to the trailered classroom. Then you got to do the same to get back for gym. Then you got to go back. Then you got to go back in for lunch. If you receive services for reading intervention or special education, same thing's going to be occurring. And then two, for those folks that are within the building structure, they're going to be immediately adjacent to heavy construction where I've got to have guys jackhammering and saw cutting through concrete floors. It's going to be very, very disruptive. We'll talk more about the 2+2 plan because that's the plan that was advanced. But I do just want to touch on the 3+1 plan. One of the things that we heard frequently was, hey, if some new construction is done, but someone gets a renovated facility, is there going to be a disparity there? And why don't we do all new construction? Um, that plan is simply too far of a reach. It's too expensive. And we did poll that plan. And Kathy's going to touch on the polling results and how it shaped the change to the planning. But it's just too far a reach for the school district. And even when we consider renovating a facility versus a new construction facility, we can make sure that all of the amenities are the same across all of our campuses. So the plan that we originally shared and tested with the community in the fall was this plan. The district was committing to use its annual operating budget to contribute just over 50% of the costs, and the referendum was making up just under 50% of the total cost of the project. That included constructing new construction options that are most challenged campuses, which are the Walden and Wilmot campus, that our Kipling and South Park campuses would receive a gut renovation. So there are good elements to both of those buildings that can be saved. The structure is good on those buildings and the flow of those buildings is good, but we can get in and we can pull out all of the guts of that building. We can knock down walls to make classrooms appropriately sized and get take care of all of the ADA issues that we have. But we can do that through a gut renovation with an addition. And at Shepherd and Caruso, we go and we touch all of those safety and security needs. But also at Shepherd, we renovate the 100-200 wing, which is the two-story structure that hasn't been renovated since it was put in service in 1961. Kathy, you're on mute, Kathy.
Sorry about that. So, we had our marching orders from the task force. They said, we think you should take that 2+2 plan out to the community, share that information far and wide as possible, because then we want you to get feedback so that we can make a decision as a task force and so that the board can make the final decision on whether and what to put a referendum on the ballot. And the board needed to make that decision by December in order to place a referendum on the March ballot. So starting in September, we sent mailers to every registered voter household. I think we sent 3 mailers, which included a public opinion poll that I'll talk about. We had videos that highlighted the key information. We had social media sharing information out and directing people to more information. And we partnered with the village. We appreciated that they shared information to reach people who may not have kids in school. So we were in their e-newsletter and their print newsletter. And the hub of our information was on our website so that anyone could ask a question, get information. We had all the details. John, skip forward one on that website. And one key component was the asked and answered. So when we were out in our, I think, 11 information sessions throughout the fall, including one like this that was virtual that we recorded and shared, um, when we heard questions, we'd put that on the asked and answered page. If people called us, and John and I always answered our phone and opened our doors to people who had questions, we were listening and responding, and we put that on asked and answered. Um, and there were multiple questions, and some of those questions are still up on our website that we'll talk about in a little bit. Um, and we surveyed in those information sessions and on that website. Oh, one more. We listened also to the community. We heard in those information sessions that at Walden, contiguous neighbors of the Walden site had some questions about where the building would be placed and some of the features of the building. Now, our architects said, and we shared with the community, that these drawings and still the drawings that you see are very early drawings. We weren't going to invest the extensive amount of money to do schematic design and construction drawings until there was a ballot on the referendum or a referendum on the ballot. Um, but we did spend time with our architects and the neighbors and listening to their concerns, and the architects came back with a couple of iterations of revisions. And so this is the most recent Walden plan, which incorporates comments from the community, and we'll continue to update. We're not done with that. These, again, are still early drawings. The same happened at Wilmot. Some Wilmot contiguous neighbors reached out, and we listened and connected them with our architects, and we had meetings, and um, that plan also was revised, and again, will continue to be revised. And at our information sessions and on our website, we had what's called a thought exchange survey, which is a qualitative survey that it allows community members to share in their own words their thoughts, their concerns, their questions. Um, and we had a good response rate to that. And then we also, the goal was to make sure people were informed so that they could respond to a public opinion poll that we put out in November in our community. And we know that people were informed and were engaged in what we were talking about throughout the community because we had a really high response rate. A typical response rate is 7 to maybe 10%, maybe as high as 15, 16. We had an 18% response rate. We know that in Deerfield, we are engaged in what's happening throughout our community and in our school. So we were glad for that response rate because that gave us some clear direction. And there were two really big points of information that we learned from that public opinion poll. And one of them is that our community values, respects, and appreciates our district. When we asked the community to grade the district, 80% gave District 109 an A or a B. We work with a polling consultant who's done public opinion polling specifically for school districts for over 30 years, and he has never seen a grade as high for a school district. So we are a community that values our schools and certainly values the educators within them. And we recognize that it's because of our teachers and the work they do and the care they put into their work for their children, for their students, that we got that grade. But the other piece of feedback was that the community was highly concerned about the tax impact. We have high tax sensitivity. And our polling consultant also said he has never seen such a high tax sensitivity in a public opinion poll in the 30 plus years that he's been doing it. And he's certainly not seen that combination of high regard for a district and high tax sensitivity. So, with that data, we listened and we brought the referendum task force back together to review all of the polling data. We showed you 2 points. There were maybe 40 pages of polling data, which were presented to the task force and also to the Board of Education at a working committee of the whole meeting. And the task force looked at the feedback and made the recommendation to the superintendent that based on all the needs and based on, the 3 meetings that we had and all the information that we have had as a task force, we should move forward with a referendum in March 2026, but it can't be the referendum, the plan that we shared with the community because of that tax sensitivity. So you have to reduce the tax impact. And the board discussed and carefully considered all that data and the task force recommendation. And the board did vote in December to place a referendum on the ballot on March 17th, 2026.
So one of the questions that is before us is why now? And this brings us back almost to the beginning of this process. And one of the things that the steering committee looked at and talked about was, could we try to wait longer in an effort to save additional resources and dollars for the community to reduce any impact of a referendum? And one of the important things to understand is how the district generates revenue on an annual basis. Not unlike our peer districts around us, we are almost entirely reliant on local property tax revenue to run the school district. We do receive some resources from the state and federal government, but those are a very, very small portion of the district's annual operating budget. But we are a tax capped entity. So that means that the district's revenue is growing by the lesser of the consumer price index, or 5%, from one year to the next. So it means the tax levy for the 26-27 school year is growing at 2.9% because that was CPI that's driving that. The year thereafter is 2.7%. Those peak years of inflation that we all experienced recently, we had inflation in excess of 7% one year and at 6.5% the next. The district was capped at 5% those years. We know that construction cost escalation averages 4% each year. So the cost of this project is only going to continue to get further and further out of reach of the school district. And on the scope of what's needed here, we're looking at a $9 million year over year increase. One of the issues that's come up is, hey, can you cut and can you find additional areas of the budget that could be directed towards capital improvements? And we've done that. And those decisions aren't easy decisions and they're not always popular decisions, but we've reduced administrative staff and support staff and instructional staff, even reduced a program like our Mandarin program because we didn't have enough students enrolled in that program, even though a number of members of our community really valued that program. So we've made a lot of hard decisions to come to this moment, having reduced the tax impact as much as we can. But we know that each year we wait, it's only going to get further and further out of reach of the district's annual operating budget. We also know that it is a matter of time. I typically say it could be 2 days from now, could be 2 months from now, could be 2 years from now, but we are going to have a catastrophic failure. We had another one last night. Unfortunately, it was an area that didn't shut us down. We've had the same thing at South Park now twice in the last 12 months, and it hasn't shut us down. But if one of these issues with our water main happens inside the building, or we have issues where we have a main sewer line issue, we are not talking about a closure for a day. We are talking about weeks or potentially months until we can get enough trailers on site. Those don't come overnight. And even when we are able to get them on site, we have to run power, we have to run water and sewer to them, and we have to get a certificate of occupancy from the Regional Office of Education before we can host class in those facilities. So we know that is in our future. And then throughout this process, we've heard, concerns from our community about what are you doing around these space and accessibility needs today? My child is one of the children that is, being served in a converted, closet or a converted copy room. What are you doing to rectify that issue today? And so all of that brought us to the point that it made sense to move forward now, because if we had waited just another 6 months to November, it pushed everything back a year. Or if you wait into the future, again, you're talking about 2 years, 3 years time. The last referendum in District 109 was 20 years ago. It was in April of 2005, and it was an operating rate referendum. An operating rate referendum is one that allows the district to increase its taxation beyond that cap of CPI or 5%. Versus this is a capital referendum, which is allowing the district to borrow and the taxpayer to pay back the bond proceeds that would fund capital improvements. So at that point in the district's history, the district had just run 14 consecutive deficit budgets. And the promises that were made to the community at that time was that the district was going to end deficit spending. And the district surely has done that. This was the 21st consecutive operating budget with a surplus since that time. And what I found interesting, because I wasn't here at this time, was that the promise of the community is that the board and administration would put in place a maintenance plan that would extend the useful life of these school buildings, but that they weren't going to come back to the community for 5 to 8 years to ask for additional resources. Well, it's been 20 years. So I think we can, confidently say that subsequent boards and administration kept those promises.
John, I updated the slide. It's now almost 21 years. In the fall,
Ah,
we were
okay.
saying 20 in 2025, but now we're almost 26 years or 21 years.
So breaking down what changed. So owing to that feedback that Kathy shared about tax sensitivity, we heard the message loud and clear that we needed to reduce that tax increase associated with a referendum based on the community's feedback. And we didn't need to do it by a little, we needed to do it by a lot. So when this was polled with the community, it was polling a referendum that was just over $121 million. We've reduced that now to $87.7 million. And we've done it in two different ways. The first is that the district has increased its contribution to this project through its annual operating budget. So it's important to understand the different sources of funding. So in our original plan, the district was looking at roughly a 50% contribution, now is just over 60%. And those resources come from two buckets on the district's annual budget side. The first is all of the resources and funds that the district has saved for these capital needs and can continue to contribute from its annual operating budget throughout the course of construction. That's just over $51 million. But understanding that the district makes significant capital investments on an annual basis to keep these aging buildings going, if we solve all of these issues through this plan, we no longer need to use what portion of our annual budget is being used to fund those capital projects, and the district can pivot and issue what are called alternate bonds. And the best way to think about bonds for a school district is to think about them just like a mortgage. It has a term and it has an annual payment for principal and interest. And the district can then use a portion of its annual operating budget to pay back those alternate bonds over the life of those bonds, which is 25 years. But there is also a piece which is the referendum bonds. Those referendum bonds are also paid over 25 years, and those represent an increase to the taxpayer beyond the district's annual increase for its annual operating budget. How can we do this in terms of contributing such significant resources from the district's annual operating budget? Well, it has a lot to do with what prior boards and administrations have accomplished, which is setting up the district to have these budget surpluses that can be directed towards capital needs, but also looking at the condition of the district. So in 2019, the district was uprated to a AAA bond rating through Moody's. That's the highest rating that an entity can receive. And that means that the district is going to get the best rates should the district issue these bonds. The district has received the highest financial designation from the Illinois State Board of Education for more years than I can recall. And the district is one of only 138 districts in the country that's produces a narrative budget document that we submit for blind peer review to a government finance officers group. So I'd encourage anybody that's interested in the district's finances, and that includes things related to the district's annual budget and projections, but it also includes things like taxation processes, enrollment, staffing projections. That's available on the district's website, and it's intended to be a resource that if you have interest in something, you just look up what page is about the annual levy, and you can learn about it in a narrative format that's accessible to anybody that doesn't have any experience in finance or school district finance. And then the district is audited annually. We do it because it's a legal requirement, but we go further than that, and we produce what's called comprehensive annual financial report. And we submit that to two government finance officers groups, and it goes through blind peer review, and we're proud to have received recognition for, again, more years than I can recall. In addition to the district increasing its contribution from the annual operating budget, we had to pull back on the scope of the proposed project to, again, bring that tax impact down associated with the referendum. And the biggest piece of this $22 million reduction was related to the elimination of a third multipurpose room space at our 4 elementary campuses. One of the things that we heard as we talked to teachers and administrators at each of these buildings is that the schools really struggle to compete sharing a multipurpose room space that that functions for physical education classes as also functioning as its cafeteria. And we were desirous of changing that so that we had a dedicated gym, a dedicated multi-purpose room to support all of our physical education classes, and then have that cafeteria space. We can do what's called issue this as a bid alternate so that if pricing comes in better than anticipating, we can go ahead and do it now as part of this project. But if we don't, because the resources aren't there now, the architects can design these buildings, know exactly where those spaces would go, and then the district could revisit that in the future as resources permit. The other thing that we pulled back on was plumbing and electrical related to expanding the scope of science curriculum in the elementaries. We were contemplating future-proofing these buildings, bringing in additional gas lines, water lines, air lines to some of those instructional spaces to support the growth of science-related curricula. That's not a need that we have today. It was a forward-looking aspiration, and so we can pull back on that, and the district could add that in the future if needed. And there were a number of other issues that we looked at that simplified things and reduced some cost as well, but those were really the big two buckets. And the net of that is that the tax impact was decreased by 33%. So when we pulled this plan, it had an estimated tax impact of $536 for every $10,000 that someone pays in taxes. So if your bill was $10,000, this was estimated to increase your tax bill by $536. We've now reduced that to $359. But we don't, even though we've reduced the scope and we have reduced the tax impact, we still don't compromise on addressing the critical needs before the district. All of the water and sewer issues are resolved and future-proofed for generations to come. The HVAC issues, the ability to heat and cool our schools reliably is resolved. Every safety and security deficiency is resolved. All of our accessibility issues across our campuses are resolved. And all of those issues of students and staff without enough space or working in marginalized spaces is addressed. Throughout this process, we've had a tax calculator on the district's website so you can understand what the impact is for your tax bill. It's been updated to reflect this change in the plan. I would encourage anybody to go to the district's website to input their tax bill details so that they can understand the impact on them.
And John, we should specify that the tax calculator spits out an estimate that's the tax impact, estimated tax impact for 1 year, and the life of the bonds is 25 years.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. So one of the questions that we get is, if the district issues these referendum bonds, is the district then increasing taxation on those bonds over the life of the loan? And the answer is no. So when bonds are issued with voter approval, the district has to file with the county clerk the bond principal and interest schedule for the life of those bonds. And so that number that is to be collected from the tax base on an annual basis is a static number. There are different factors that can influence anybody's tax bill and make it, go up or down based off of your property value, if your property value changes, or the overall, property value within the taxing boundaries. Those factors could change over time, but once these bonds are issued, that number to be collected is static for the life of those bonds, which Kathy mentioned is 25 years. One of the questions and concerns that's been raised to us is, we're, one of the highest taxing, entities. Some folks had sent us a screen grab from Facebook that says, we are the fourth highest taxing body in the country. That's not true. It may feel that way, and respect that. But the school district is right in the middle of Lake County school districts. And then we asked our financial advisor to go ahead and also pull by municipality and look at all municipalities. So that's taxation inclusive of School District 109, but also the high school district, the park district, the village, all of the taxing bodies within the municipality, and compare that to all of the municipalities across Cook and Lake counties. And you can see where the district falls in comparison there as well. So this is where we pivot and give you a little bit of a look at what some of these spaces can look like. Some of these are still conceptual at this early phase, and some of them are actual, and I'll point that out. But this gives you a good aerial view of the Kipling renovation and addition plan. So Kipling is actually laid out in a manner that really works well. It's kind of like two big rectangles sandwiched together. But where Kipling really struggles, in addition to the infrastructure issues, is the size of classrooms, because a good portion of the building was constructed when the typical classroom size was much smaller than it needs to be today. And so this renovation allows us to then, in the gray shaded area, gut renovate the school, knock down walls, move some of the noisy pieces into the addition. So spaces like our art classes, our music classes, moving that to an addition, freeing up additional square footage so that we can knock down walls and resize classrooms, and add those amenities that we're missing, the pocketed doors, the washrooms that are K and one classrooms. Um, Similar story at South Park, where much of the building is laid out in a way that works well, but needs to be renovated. And we can accomplish the same thing. Again, here, renovating all of that space that's shaded in gray, but adding and moving some of those noisy elements to be adjacent to our gym, and freeing up space to knock down walls and resize classrooms again. At Walden and the Wilmot campuses, you'll notice that our replacement campus needs to hug the existing structure. And that's because we'll be utilizing the existing building for 1 year to house our Kipling and our South Park students when we do renovations of these facilities. So at Walden, you can see the building kind of hugs that dashed red line. That's the existing facility. And this gives you a look, an aerial look at what that building will look like. And one of the things that's exciting about the Walden and the Wilmot campuses is an opportunity to really resolve some of the traffic issues that are a real challenge at those sites. Pulling more of that queuing for parent pickup and drop off onto the actual site instead of spilling out into the neighborhood. You see the same here at Wilmot with a proposed replacement building located in the corner of Deerfield and Wilmot Roads, where the district used to have a two-story structure about, I think about 17 years ago. And again, creating more of an opportunity to have some of that traffic queuing occur on the property instead of on that busy intersection at Deerfield and Wilmot Road. And this gives you a look inside these buildings on what they might look like for our elementary schools, even though we're not fully along on the design process. But certainly if you have toured one of our facilities, and we have a number of upcoming sessions where you can take tours of these buildings, these are a far cry from what these buildings look like today. And at our middle school for Shepherd, the district is prepared to do this construction in the summer of 2026. So if you have a student that will be at Shepherd in next fall, all of the classrooms that serve language arts, social studies, and math haven't been renovated since they were put in service in 1961. So that building gets a complete renovation, a new roof, new mechanical systems. And this is an inside look of the classroom and that corridor and what it'll look like once completed. And we have not had an opportunity for the community to tour our middle schools, but we will have those opportunities at future information sessions. So looking at a timeline of how we would phase this construction, moving from March of 2026, if the community were to approve a referendum, we would be able to begin our construction at the middle schools. We can do that construction at the middle schools in the summer months and not impact the school year. It'll be a very busy summer in 2026, and it'll be a very tight summer, but we estimate that we can complete the work that's needed at Shepherd and Caruso in the summer of 26, and then coming back and finishing that work in the summer of 27. In early spring 2027, new construction would begin on the Walden and Wilmot sites adjacent to those campuses. So the building would start to go up in the spring of 2027. The noisy work and the dirty work associated with digging and setting the foundation footings of the building would occur in the late spring and over the summer months. And then the building would start to go up such that it's dried in for the winter months, and then they shift to doing all of the work on the inside of the building. That new construction buildings will be open for August of 2028. So Wilmot and Walden students will go to the brand new facility in August of 2028 for the 28-29 school year. In June of 28, we'll begin the gut renovation and additions at the Kipling and South Park campuses. And Kipling and South Park students will utilize the old Wilmot and old Walden campus as their swing site in the 28-29 school year. Their building will be ready by August of 29, so they will move into their newly renovated facility in August of 29. And then we will tear down the old Wilmot and Walden and finish that site work by the end of the decade. So that means that we will have two schools operating on one site at the same time. Now, one of the issues that's been raised frequently throughout this process is, it's come up from families that aren't thrilled about having two schools on one site, and won't that be a challenge? And it will be a challenge. And we've heard from neighbors that are desirous of, the Wilmot and the Walden campus. Can you tear it down and put it in the exact same spot? Can't you find somewhere else for students to go during that period of time? And we did look at that. We went so far as to hire a commercial real estate broker to see if there was some vacant property that we could utilize as a temporary school. Unfortunately, even in the best case scenario, that was going to be at minimum a $10 million investment to do it for one side of town. And more likely it was going to extend into the $20 to $30 million range, because any property that the district were to utilize, even as a temporary home, is going to need to receive a certificate of occupancy from the Regional Office of Education. That means that we need to meet all of the applicable building codes, and we'd have to do significant construction on a temporary school site. And owing to the fact that the sentiment from the community was you need to pull the tax impact down, not increase it, that's unfortunately out of reach. But how can we do this and make it work for that overlap year? Well, we're going to have to stagger arrival and dismissal for those two campuses. And to understand the optimal conditions for that, the district has commissioned a traffic study. So we already had a company that studied pedestrian and vehicular traffic at these sites and will advise in the optimal staggered drop-off and dismissal times. Kipling and South Park students will receive free transportation for that year that they are attending their alternate site, and they'll be encouraged to use it to further reduce congestion at that site. We know that we will need to maintain some on-site parking for parents, particularly that have to pick up a student early or someone that has to go home sick. But it's going to be our staff that are going to have to compromise, and we've been having these conversations with them that we're going to have some off-site parking for our staff, and then we're going to have to provide them a shuttle to get to that school site. But this allows us to have school, and once students are in the building, they'll have access to the amenities that are accustomed to today. We still will have access to playgrounds for recess and physical education classes, and we will still continue to be able to work with our park district partners to offer before school care, after school care, and we still will be able to offer school buildings to run the park district summer programs that we know are important for the community as well. One of the issues that frequently comes up as a question is, have you guys already identified the contractor that's going to do this, and are they going to, make some massive profit on this project? The answer is no. The school district as a public entity is required to issue a competitive bidding process, and the district's required to take the low responsible bidder. So evaluate the contractor to make sure that they can do the scope of work and that they have experience doing similar projects, but that there is competition in terms of the price that the district would pay on this. And the community input, even if a referendum passes, is going to continue. We've been engaged with the community and have shared that we know we're a big neighbor, but we want to be a good neighbor. And that means that we're going to continue to engage with those neighbors that are contiguous to these schools and these properties so that they understand construction, that they have questions, that they're answered, that they can continue to influence how the buildings are laid out, and the amenities that the buildings have and how they fit in with the neighborhood. We have to go through the plan commission process with the village, and that's inclusive of community feedback. And we'll continue to keep the community informed through our regular Board of Education meetings. And this question's come up also. What happens if the referendum fails? Um, we don't know what the district would choose to do. We know, the district could ask again and could ask on the same plan, or revise the plan. But there's a couple of key pieces here. Um, we know that this plan, if we wait till November, is only going to get more expensive. And because the district is a tax capped entity, the district isn't going to be able to marshal additional resources to contribute to this project. So the longer we wait, the more expensive this gets. And also that came up at the task force was, what else can you cut? Could you cut the scope further? And the architect was quick to point out that you're going to be cutting instructional spaces. The big things that we could cut, that third multi-purpose room, if we cut further, we're reducing instructional amenities. District could elect to ask a vote at a different time, not in November of 26, but in another year, understanding that you're going to end up spending more and likely look to cut other things. Or you could forego a referendum at all. And that means that the district is going to need to spend in the next few years upwards of $30 million on HVAC systems and other pieces to keep these buildings going. And that's a commitment. Do we want to invest those resources and still have the issues that we have today? Kathy.
So, our goal here as a district is to make sure that we are out there in the community sharing this information, answering all the questions, because our goal is to make sure that you are an informed voter. We as a district, now that a referendum is on the ballot, we cannot advocate one way or another. We can't tell you vote yes, we can't tell you vote no, but we can encourage you strongly to vote. So we want to share some voter information with you. Um, as we said, election day is March 17th, 2026, and there's a timeline for registering to vote. And you have options to register to vote in person, and there are several local locations to do that. You can register online, you can register by mail, and there's even grace period registration at early voting sites where you can register and vote at the same time. And we're dropping in those links. The source of this information is the Lake County Clerk, so you can visit their website to get information to register to vote. And then when you are registered, you have many options to vote. Early voting at the Waukegan County Courthouse starts early. It starts February 5th. That's next week. And countywide early voting starts March 2nd. We have a voting location, an early voting location here in Deerfield. That's Deer Spring Pool. But you can vote at any early voting site in Lake County. So if you work elsewhere in the county or you're out and about and you see an early voting site, you are able to vote at any early voting site in the county. If you have requested a mail-in ballot, those will start heading out into mailboxes on February 5th. And you have until March 12th to request a mail-in ballot. And on election day, you can vote at any Lake County voting site. So you can log into the Lake County Voter Power site if you are a registered voter to search for the preferred site for your address. We want to share with you what you will see on the ballot because it's not in, I guess, the King's English or any kind of, it's in the legal English. So this is required language for a ballot. initiative. So this was written by a lawyer, and we want to make sure that people see this and are aware that this is the referendum question. A yes vote on your ballot for this referendum question is your approval of the referendum. A no vote on your ballot is your disapproval of the referendum. And our job, as we said, is sharing this information. So I think we have several more in-person information sessions, maybe 10 more, including tonight at Wilmot. And in our in-person sessions, we do start with a tour of the facility. The building principal and our director of buildings and grounds, Tim Ryan, take you around the facilities to see the state of them. And the operational issues and the impact on teaching and learning. So that's a list. If we'd love to see you in person taking those tours, and we again present and answer every question. We don't leave until all questions are answered. So but we have those and all of our in-person and one more virtual session on our website at dps109.org/redefine. Please share this with your family, friends, and neighbors. We want to make sure, again, that our community is informed about this initiative. Um, and now I think that we can go ahead and answer questions. Let me go ahead and see what we've got. We've answered some, but I will revisit those as well to make sure that we've answered them. John, one question, and I'm not sure we have the answer to this, but I know you can answer about our architect and who we will use in the construction process. Someone asked who was in charge when District 113 and Deerfield High School had their renovations. We want to make sure that District 109 is not making the same mistakes that were made at the high school, that soon after completing those expensive renovations, they had to go back and tear down many of the additions because they weren't done well. We don't want those same mistakes happening here. Make sure that the renovations won't be obsolete 5 to 10 years from now.
Yeah, I don't know who the architect was for District 113, but it was not the district's architect, District 109's architect. So we work with a firm called Archon. We've also retained an owner's rep. Their job is to be another set of eyes on this process. And the district has issued a request for qualifications and is interviewing construction management firms actually early next week. So we've built a team that will be capable of doing this work and making sure that these facilities are the pride of the community for generations to come.
And I think we answered this next question, but I want to make sure that we're clear on that third multi-purpose room. What was the purpose of that? And, I know it's an alt bid. What would happen if we do get that third multi-purpose room, and
Yeah,
what can we
it's
do
really
without
to
it?
relieve kind of the strain on our competing use of a facility to serve as a cafeteria and also to be a physical education space. So we've heard from a number of folks that our cafeteria spaces are somewhat lacking. And while it's a bigger conversation than we're having today, if the district ever shifted its approach to serving lunch, do we have a dedicated cafeteria space that could serve needs around food prep? So we will be mindful of that as we construct these spaces, but really that third multi-purpose room space is intended to relieve the competition between a space being a lunchroom, but also being needed for physical education.
Um, and we also went through the timeline, but we'll just touch on this again. How are that 1 year when we have the overlap of two schools, how's that going to look? How's that going to work?
Yeah, I can back up to that slide and just talk it through maybe a different way. So if from the perspective of a parent with a child going through this process, if you were a parent of a kindergarten student in the 27-28 school year at South Park. So if you had a South Park kindergartner in 27-28, they would attend kindergarten at the current South Park school. They would attend first grade at the old Wilmot campus in the 28-29 school year, and they would attend third grade through the remainder of their career at South Park from 29 on in the renovated South Park campus. And again, the biggest challenge here is once students and staff are in the building, the day doesn't look any different than it does now, right? They have access to all the same amenities. They're still able to go outside for recess and physical education class. The real challenge will be at arrival and dismissal. And we are working with our traffic consultant on the optimal timing of that arrival and dismissal to make it work.
And one thing that as building leaders, principals, assistant principals, even teachers are thinking ahead for that one overlap year. Um, they are looking for ways to take advantage of the situation and really leverage that stronger together, that being together. And they've already talked about the opportunity, particularly for fifth graders. So Walden and Kipling fifth graders who the next year will be at Shepherd together, having really intentional planning around schedules and events so that those students could have connections for a better transition going into Shepherd, going into middle school. And the same would happen with Wilmot and South Park students who are getting ready to be Caruso students the next year. Um, I've got a two-part question here, John. Um, One person would like to see all the engineering and architectural reports and evaluations that we allege support the need for this project, maybe things that were shared with the steering committee early on and some of the more detailed work we shared with the task force. Just telling us your summary or various polls is sufficient. Having attended a high school built in 1902 without full AC, which was more than adequate for learning, and having worked in much older buildings in the US and elsewhere that are significantly older than the schools that we are discussing. This seems to be little more than a desire to make the facilities newer just to be newer and adds further to the ridiculous tax burden already present in Deerfield. None of what we have presented justifies the cost without seeing the supporting document. And so I typed a response that we have our owner's rep and our architects worked on a summary report of facility needs because there are some things in those detailed reports that we are not allowed to share due to security issues. And so in a follow-up question, a summary report is not enough. The full and unabridged set of engineering and architectural reports are requested. Is that something that we can provide? Or I
I
know we
think
have met with community members and shared some more details.
Yeah, I think that if folks have specific questions, we've made our architects and the owner's rep available to talk directly to them and can certainly do that. Some of the challenge around providing some of that is that it includes all of the floor plans of our buildings, and we don't release the floor plans of our buildings for security purposes. I know that we have worked with the OR and the architect to release a summary of that. But there are some that we won't release for security reasons.
But again, we will, and we'll drop my email, John's email, in the chat. We answer every email, are open to any meetings, conversations by phone. So don't hesitate to reach out. Our information is also on the website. Another question, and I'm glad to see that the mailer got to homes. I got mine. I'm also a resident. So you said in the letter that the impact for our home with $10,000 property tax bill will be $359. But for how many years? That's $359, that estimate per year for 25 years for the life of the bonds. And John, you talked about this a little bit. Could you
Yeah,
reiterate the
yeah. The again, when if voters approve a referendum, when the a district issues those bonds, it's required to file with the county clerk the full principal and interest schedule associated with those bonds, and that is the dollar amount that's collected from the tax base. We know an estimate of what that dollar impact would be per $10,000 today. There are conditions that can change over the life of those bonds over that 25 years that can change how, the entirety of the tax base, right? So if the entire tax base grows, right, through new development or appreciation of property, the tax rate goes down. But that is an estimate of what that would impact would be. And again, that impact of paying back those bonds remains on a tax bill over the 25 years, and then it comes off when those bonds are retired.
John, one question that I also typed an answer to, but I want to revisit is that 3+1 plan. Um, the other deciding factors about construction, really, it was just that our polling showed we had to decrease the
Yeah,
costs.
yeah,
Um, and that was just, we did poll the community and asked that question, and it was just too high of a tax impact.
correct.
Um, Another question that came through, which was something that we heard a lot throughout the fall as well, about the ability to use Holy Cross as a swing site and talked about the, search for a swing site. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, any facility that's not currently functioning as a school is going to require significant investment from the school district, even if a school was in operation to make it utilized for District 109. So the same holds true of Holy Cross or any other vacant site right now. The district would have to invest significant resources into that site. And again, we looked at this, we looked at it, every option. The best case scenario our architect and owner's rep was estimating would be a $10 million impact just if we were to exercise that for one half of the town. If we did that, for both sides of town, we're looking at something in the 20 to $30 million range.
Great. And someone asked, and our board president, Ryan Kuo, was on this as well, and he answered one of the questions that came through. He typed his response, but we can talk about. So we had a big fund balance, and we have a good bonding capacity. We're at that point where our finances are, in shape to fund actually 60% of the total project cost. Why hasn't that money been used to maintain the facilities?
Is that a question for me, Kathy?
Yeah, and Ryan answered that how the funds will be used,
I
but
think I think what it's important for the community to understand is that the district has continued to make investments to keep the buildings going as long as they, have been going. If the district were to keep the buildings going through the do nothing plan, so to speak, the baseline plan, replacing HVAC, replacing sections of roof, everything that is at end of life, the things that we can get to. We can't get to everything. Um, we would still have to borrow, and we would still be expending that 60% of that slice of the pie to keep the buildings going. And we would be arriving at a point, in the future where we'd exhausted all of those resources and don't have those resources to bring to bear and still have many of the challenges that we have today.
and the point of we haven't maintained our buildings. We have invested a great amount in our buildings, and if you come to our information session at Shepherd, for example, you will see some of those investments in the library, in the cafeteria space, and in the band and orchestra room, which just opened last year. At Caruso, the auditorium, also the cafeteria, our science wings. Um, and over the years, our schools did not always have air conditioning, and we did invest in putting air conditioning on the buildings. So we have maintained the buildings, but it comes to a point where you can maintain to a point, but our buildings have kind of
Yeah, I
reached
mean,
the
it's
point.
a very different place from where the district was, 30 years ago when the buildings were 40 years of age. There was a lot of life that was left in some of those components of the buildings that are failing us now, right? In terms of plumbing infrastructure, in particular. So, again, to Kathy's point, and I think a lot of those have been directed at the middle schools, and it's reflective of what, we surveyed, and a lot of those challenges are really focused at our elementary schools.
Hey, it looks like we've answered all the questions, but if something pops up after we log off here, please don't hesitate to find us at an in-person information session tonight at Wilmot, maybe, or reach out to us by email or phone. We are here. We are really interested in hearing your thoughts and answering your questions. So thanks for being here today and stay warm, everybody. Bye-bye.